بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما، وأصلح لنا شأننا كله ولا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا طرفة عين. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to continue with the explanation of the book تعليم المتعلم طريق التعلم by Imam Burhanuddin al-Zarnuji alayhi rahmatullah. And today we're going to start with a new fasl where we stopped, and that is the fasl where the author, he says, فصل في بداية السبق وقدره وترتيبه. That's where we stopped, correct? طيب. Before we start, I just want to take the time out to apologize to you, brothers and sisters. We had a couple of delays and cancellations. Sometimes it was due to weather, sometimes it was different things that came up, so forgive me for that. We're a bit delayed in finishing the book, so inshallah ta'ala, although tonight's class will be a little bit short to ease us back into it, but we ask Allah to allow us to finish the book, inshallah ta'ala. So, tonight's class, or this chapter that we're going to be in, which is a long chapter, and it's from the chapters that are remaining, the longer ones. The chapters after this chapter will all be pretty short, inshallah ta'ala. The Shaykh, rahimahullah ta'ala, he's discussing and he's talking about some advice and some tips with regards to how to study and how to present your lesson to your teacher and topics of that nature. So he says this chapter is about في بداية السبق, okay, the beginning of the lesson or the study. As-sabq here is referring to when the student would go to the teacher with the lesson that they are going to read to the teacher. طيب. So the amount that you're going to the lesson that they're going to read from the text or the book to the sheikh, that the sheikh will then correct the person or the student or give them instruction pertaining to, that is what it's referring to as sabq, right? So there is for example, the student will go to the teacher and he's studying, for example, a book of fiqh, or he's memorizing a matan or a poem, for example, in a science or in a study of sharia, and the student will then read that particular lesson for the day to the teacher. طيب. So that is known as sabq. Then there is muraja'a, as we'll come to mention in the lesson. Muraja'a is when the student now goes and reviews by repeating it over and over and over until they memorize it, or they are doing discussions with their classmates, or وهكذا. We'll speak about some of those things in the lesson, inshallah ta'ala. طيب. So he's going to be talking about that lesson and the beginning of the lesson and the beginning of the class or the studying and the presentation that they're going to be reading to their teacher, and also the amount of what is to be recited to the teacher, and the tartibihi, or what tartibihi, and how to organize the lesson that's going to be prepared. طيب. The Shaykh, he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, كان أستاذنا شيخ الإسلام برهان الدين رحمه الله تعالى يوقف بداءة السبق على يوم الأربعاء، وكان يروي في ذلك حديثا ويستدل به ويقول قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما من شيء بدأ به يوم الأربعاء إلا وقد تم. He says, he begins by saying that the author, Burhanuddin al-Zarnuji, he says that my teacher, who was the author of, we mentioned him before, the author of the book Al-Hidayah, طيب, he says that our teacher would make the starting point for the lesson in the week to be on Wednesday. طيب. He will make us start the first day of the lesson will be on a Wednesday, okay? And then he says, he would do that, and he would bring a dalil or a hadith based on that as a proof. And he would say that the Prophet ﷺ said, there is not ما من شيء بدأ به يوم الأربعاء إلا وقد تم. which means that there's nothing that begins on the Wednesday except it will come to a completion, or it will come to a fruition, it will be completed. Now the hadith itself is weak. This narration is not a narration that is authentic. Al-Imam al-Sakhawi, he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, لَمْ أَقِفْ لَهُ عَلَى أَصْلٍ. He said, I haven't come across any foundation pertaining to that particular hadith. And there's others like Tabarani who mention it in his Awsat, but they say that the narration is weak. In any case, he says that this is a practice that his teacher would do. He would begin the lesson on Wednesday. And then he says, وَهَكَذَا كَانَ يَفْعَلُ أَبُو حَنِيفَةَ. Abu Hanifa used to also do the same thing, rahimahullah. وَكَانَ يَرْوِي هَذَا الْحَدِيث عَنْ أُسْتَاذِهِ الشيخ الإمام الأجل قوام الدين أحمد ibn Abdirahman rahimahullah ta'ala. The author, he says that also Abu Hanifa used to do similar, and he used to narrate this narration from his teacher. And he mentioned that Imam Qiwamuddin Ahmad ibn Abdirahman. However, it might have been a mistake from the author, because that particular scholar, rahimahullah ta'ala, although he was from the scholars, he was a scholar that was known, but Abu Hanifa did not take ilm from him, and there was no connection. So maybe he meant somebody else, Allahu alam. In any case, I'll continue with the author. He says, وَسَمِعْتُ مِمَّنْ أَثِقُ بِهِ أَنَّ الشيخ يوسف الهمداني رحمه الله تعالى كان يوقف كل عمل من أعمال الخير على يوم الأربعاء. وهذا لأن يوم الأربعاء يوم خلق فيه النور ويوم نحس في حق الكفار فيكون مباركا للمؤمنين. طيب. So here the Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions, again, he quoted Abu Hanifa, and earlier he quoted his teacher. And he also mentioned another Imam, Yusuf al-Hamadani, who would say that he would begin his work, whatever effort or work he would begin in teaching, on a Wednesday. Okay? And then he says, and he gives a reason, because he says لأن هذا يوم الأربعاء يوم خلق فيه النور, because the day of Wednesday is the day in which the light was created. Now that statement is based on a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, right? The hadith that's in Sahih Muslim, in which it's a long hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning about the order of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, right? It's a long hadith. That Allah created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and then he mentions on each day what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create. And in that narration it mentions وَخَلَقَ النُّورِ يَوْمُ الْأَرْبِعَاءِ. Allah created light on Wednesday. طيب. So in any case, one might ask, what's the correlation between the creation of light and this? There is no relationship, and how is that necessarily used as a dalil to start your classes or your matters on Wednesday? Some of the ulama, they said that it was just an ijtihad from those scholars, where because they would say that ilm is light and ilm is nur, and nur was created on Wednesday, so to start any effort in knowledge on Wednesday. But at the end of the day, this is something that is from the ijtihadat of some of the scholars. It's not something that you have to do, or you're not obligated, you're obliged to begin a lesson on a Wednesday. You can begin a lesson on the beginning of the week, at the end of the, whatever it might be, right? The first day of the week is what day for us? Al-Ahad, right? Al-Ahad is the first day of the week, and the last day of the week is? Yeah, so Al-Ahad. طيب. So if it's Al-Ahad, or you can start on Saturday, or it doesn't really matter. There's no nas in the sunnah that says you have to start a class at this particular day or this particular, there's nothing, it's just ijtihad. But you might see some of the ulama of the past maybe starting an initiative on a day that has some barakah on it. There was like a day like Friday, for example, or they might start an initiative at whatever it might be. But in any case, he's only mentioning here the practice that was done by his teachers and some of the ulama of the Hanafiya, alayhi rahmatullah. Okay? So that is with regards to the initiating or the beginning of the lesson. طيب. وأما قدر السبق في الابتداء. As for the how much do you start or initiate the lessons that you are now presenting to your teacher with, the sabq we spoke about, right? He says, وَأَمَّا قَدْرُ السَّبْقِ. What is the amount of, or the length, or the amount that you're going to present or read to begin with? طيب. He says, فَقَدْ كَانَ أبو حنيفة رحمه الله تعالى يحكي عن الشيخ القاضي الإمام عمر بن الإمام بكر الزرنجري رحمه الله تعالى أنه قال مشايخنا رحمهم الله تعالى. He says, our mashayikh, they said, so Abu Hanifa is quoting a sheikh who said that their scholars said, ينبغي أن يكون قدر السبق للمبتدئ قدر ما يمكن ضبطه بالإعادة مرتين. He says that what is befitting, right, or what is suitable for the beginner student when it comes to the beginning of the lesson that he's going to prepare and memorize, and is the amount, he says, قدر ما يمكن ضبطه بالإعادة مرتين. The amount that is sufficient for the student to have a grasp of it if he reads it twice. And he reads it once, he reads it twice, and he has a grasp of the... In other words, he's explaining how you begin with a small amount, right? Whether it's if you're a beginner student in memorizing the Quran, or you're trying to memorize or understand a particular text, then you begin with a small amount. And this is something that's important here we need to understand. And this is the methodology of the scholars and the students of knowledge of the past and present, although sometimes students nowadays might not give as much priority to this, is part of the studying of a particular science or a study is memorizing. So there is memorizing and understanding it together, right? And this is very important for the talib al-ilm to understand, that hifz and memorizing is very, very important when it comes to seeking knowledge, right? Especially now in the times that we're living in, I don't know if you've probably seen this, but you see there's a lot more emphasis being given to what? Just understand the topic. As long as you understand it, you don't need to memorize it. No, both are important, right? Memorizing is important, and understanding what you've memorized is also important. You don't want to memorize texts without knowing what is being read. And also, memorizing the text will help you in easily remembering and having the ability to reference that knowledge very fast. And that's really what real ilm is. Real ilm is what you have memorized and what you're able to bring forth when it's needed. What is this mas'ala? Oh, this mas'ala is 1, 2, 3, 4. What is the dalil? 1, 2, 3. But it's something that you have memorized and you understand at the same time. So when you're going to the teacher with this amount, it's a small amount that you can stick, and if you read it 2, 3 times, you have it in your mind. You go to the sheikh, you read it to the sheikh, he explains it for you, you take your notes, as we'll talk about, as to what the meaning of that portion of the lesson is. Then you go back and you review and read and memorize and repeat the notes, whatever you took as notes, to now to solidify and to remember the knowledge. That will come. طيب. So he says for the beginner student, it's important that, as the scholars mentioned, to begin with a small amount. وَيَزِيدُ كُلَّ يَوْمٍ كَلِمَةٍ. And every day, then he will increase a word. He'll add a word, and now he'll make it slowly, right? More and more. Okay. حتى إنه وإن طال وكثر يمكن ضبطه بالإعادة مرتين. He says it'll get to a point where even if the lesson becomes longer and it's more information, he will still have the capacity to what? To grasp it if he reads it twice. Why? Because you have now, you've gradually, step by step, worked out your ability to do so. So what's important to understand when we're talking about the studying or the process of studying is that you start small and you grow slowly, gradually, and you build your capacity to memorize and to understand, right? Because at the end of the day, you're working out your muscles up here, if that's for lack of a better term, right? Just the way if you're going to be working out a muscle in your body, you don't start heavy right away. You start small, what you have the capacity to lift, or وهكذا. Then until you're able to, then you move on slowly, you add a bit more weight, you add a bit more weight. It's a gradual growth until you'll see yourself having the capacity to easily lift any weight that's very heavy, and it's no problem for you. The same thing here. You slowly add, even when you memorize the Quran. Maybe at the very, very beginning, you're a beginner student of memorizing the Quran, you start with maybe in one ayah or a few lines, right? Like the child, or even the grown-up who's never memorized the Quran, who's been learning from scratch. You start small. You don't come and say, I'm going to memorize 2 pages, 3 pages. You won't be able to handle it. And the faster, as the Shaykh will mention, the benefit of also learning that small amount is when you are and reviewing, you have the capacity to retain it. It's not too difficult to get. It's a little information enough for you and palatable enough for you to retain the information. Okay? So he says you start with that small amount. طيب? So when he says مرتين, twice, it's not literally twice and you memorize it, but he's trying to express the fact that it's easy for you to understand and remember. It's easy for you to what? To understand and to remember. يمكن حفظه وتعلمه بإعادة الدرس مرتين وذلك لا يتأتى في الدرس إذا كان كثيرا. Right? Meaning that having the capacity to read it twice means it's a small amount. You won't be able to do so at the beginning if it's a large amount. Right? If you say I'm going to read a whole page once, twice, can you capture everything in that page once or twice? Unless Allah has blessed you with, mashallah, photographic memory, right? But in general, that's not the case, right? But if it's a small amount, if it's a line, a portion of an ayah, a portion of a hadith, you read it once, you read it twice, okay, you have it in your mind. To the Shaykh, he explains it for you, you take your notes as we'll come to see the process. So he says, then you start small, then you start adding words, phrases, وهكذا, until you have the capacity to read a larger amount and be able to retain it and remember it and understand it in a small amount of time or with small amounts of repetitions. He says, وَيَزِيدُ بِالرِّفْقِ وَالتَّدَرُّجِ, and it increases with الرفق, being easygoing step by step. Right? الرفق is being easygoing, not overloading yourself. Right? What tadarruj? Tadarruj is gradually, step by step. Right? Just like I mentioned earlier with the parable of the working out. Right? You don't start heavy right away. You what? There's gradual growth until you're able to carry that and your resistance becomes stronger, your strength grows, increases. Then you add. وهكذا. تدرج. فأما إذا طال السبق في الابتداء. He says if the lesson is long and a lot at the very beginning, واحتاج إلى الإعادة 10 مرات, and it will require you, instead of repeating it twice, to repeat it 10 times or more times. He says فهو في الانتهاء أيضا يكون كذلك لأنه يعتاد ذلك ولا يترك تلك العادة إلا بجهد كثير. In other words, here what he's saying is that, and if the person, he says if you continue, he says if it's a large amount, right, it will be possible for the person to continue and be able to retain it, but it's going to require them to repeat it more and more times, right? A small amount of times might require a small amount, but if it's larger, it might require more repetitions for him to grasp it, which is why it's better and easier for him to just do a gradual growth, slowly but surely. And then with that gradual growth, the amount grows. If you need to add more repetitions, you add more repetitions, no problem. Okay? وَقَدْ قِيلَ السَّبْقُ حَرْفٌ وَالتِّكْرَارُ أَلْفٌ. He says it is said that the lesson is equal to a harf, a letter. وَالتِّكْرَار, and repetition is equal to 1,000. What he's trying to say here, the meaning of what he's trying to say is that the lesson should be small or short, the amount of times you repeat it just so that you can understand and go to the teacher. But once you're done the lesson and now you're reviewing it and memorizing it, it should be what? A lot of times, so that you can solidify that amount. طيب? So you go to the Shaykh, you read it to the Shaykh. The Shaykh in the beginning might correct you, no, this is the way to read it. this is the meaning of it, you understand it. Now that you understand it and you have perfected it and you've read it in front of your teacher, now you go back and you what? You repeat it over and over and over and over until you've understood it and memorized it and it's solidified. Then you move on to the next lesson, وهكذا. Then you go to the teacher for the next lesson. وينبغي أن يبتدئ بشيء يكون أقرب إلى فهمه. He says it is suitable, or it is important that the student begins with something that is easy for them to understand. Right? So the knowledge that you're studying the knowledge itself is gradual, meaning you're learning the smaller information before the big books. Right? And whatever the science is. If you're studying fiqh, or if you're studying hadith, or if you're studying nahu, whatever it might be, start with what the scholars recommend to be start at the beginner level for the level that you're in, that you're able to easily understand and memorize. Then you go from there, right? If you say, I want to memorize hadith, for example, then you start from a small book of hadith that the scholars recommend, like the Arba'un of Imam al-Nawawi, for example. I want to immediately start from Sahih al-Bukhari, right? But rather, you gradual so that you can build yourself up that way. That's just as an example. وكان الشيخ الإمام الأستاذ شرف الدين العقيلي رحمه الله تعالى يقول: الصواب عندي في هذا ما فعله مشايخنا رحمهم الله، فإنهم كانوا يختارون للمبتدئ صغارات المبسوط لأنه أقرب إلى الفهم والضبط وأبعد عن الملالة وأكثر وقوعا بين الناس. طيب, you guys are with me, right? Did I cross you guys over? Okay. So he says, our sheikh, you tell us, the correct way according to me is what our teachers used to do. ما فعله مشايخنا رحمهم الله تعالى. What did they used to do? فإنهم كانوا يختارون للمبتدئ, they would choose, or they would select for the beginner student of knowledge صغارات المبسوط, books that are short or intermediary in length, not too long, short texts. طيب, لأنه أقرب إلى الفهم والضبط, because it is easier to understand and it's easier to retain and memorize. Okay? So you want to study fiqh, for example, in accordance to the Shafi'i madhab, and you're a beginner student. Okay, you start with a small book, beginner book, Safinatul Salah, for example. Right? Very easy, very short. You understand that book. You memorize it. Okay, Safinatul Najah, وهكذا. Right? So, متن أبو شجاع, الغاية والتغريب, وهكذا. Then eventually, now that you're able to, right, your muscles in terms of memorizing and understanding are becoming stronger and stronger, then now you eventually will grow in that particular science. You go to the next book, you go to the next book. Eventually you select one particular matan or a text or a poem, to look at. That will be your primary matan that you want to memorize for that science. That will be your reference. So for example, you say, okay, for fiqh Shafi'i, I'm going to memorize Safatul Zubad. That's the book that I'm going to memorize, and that will be my go-to in terms of my references. I'm going to study, of course. I'm going to still study Abu Shuja'. I'm going to study the whatever shuruhat I can. I'm going to study Umdat al-Salik. I'm going to eventually go to Minhaj and shuruhat. But I'll have one text as my go-to to memorize. I study Nahw, I begin with Ajrumiyya, Mutamimmatul Ajrumiyya, if I want Qatr al-Nada, right? And then I will say Alfiyat ibn Malik is the one I want to memorize for that science, right? So eventually the goal down the road is for you to actually select one text, right? Preferably a poem, because poems are easier to memorize, but you can also memorize text itself, but that will be your foundation of reference in terms of memory in that science. You go to Mustalah al-Hadith, at the beginning you memorize Bayquniyya, it's easy to memorize and understand. That's where you start. You go to Nukhba and Shuruhat, Nuzha, and then eventually say, I want to have a poem that I'm going to memorize, whether it's Alfiyat al-Iraqi or Alfiyat al-Suyuti, for example. Right? You can select an Alfiyya. Alfiyya literally means a poem with 1,000 lines. Right? Most of the funun have that type of text. So you memorize one for each one. In any case, but the beginning, you got to start what? Small. And you got to gradually grow. So he's saying the correct understanding is what our mashayikh used to do. It is what? يختارون للمبتدئ صغارات المبسوط. They will begin by selecting for the beginner student a small text. لأنه أقرب إلى الفهم والضبط, because it's easier, it's closer to memorizing and understanding. وأبعد عن الملالة, and it's also it's far away from the student becoming bored. You know, when you become overwhelmed with the text and you feel like, oh, this is not coming to an end, I can't reach the end point, you burn out. And you become lazy and you don't end up finishing, right? Many of us, it's our situation. We start a class, we start a book, we're halfway through, we burn out. We never reach the end. Oh, another class is starting. Okay, let me hop on this one. And then we don't reach the end. Part of it is because maybe it's too long, it's whatever the reasons might be, but when it's short, it's easy, it's measurable, there's a goal you can reach at the end, then you're motivated. Okay, I can finish this by this time. I can move on to the next one. I can see the progression. I can see the progress. Obviously, it's going to require patience, like we mentioned in the previous chapters, and for you to kind of stick through with it. But in any case, this is what the scholars would recommend for the beginner student. وَأَكْثَرُ وُقُوعًا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And this is something that the majority of the people, it's easier for them to, it's something that is widespread between the people, and the people are able, they have the capacity to do so, to begin small. طيب. نعم. Give me a second here. طيب. نعم وأكثر وقوعا بين الناس, and this is something that would frequently or happen quite frequently between the people. Okay, he says وينبغي, he continues and he says وينبغي أن يعلق السبق بعد الضبط والإعادة كثيرا. He says it is also critical and important to write down the lesson after you've memorized it, or once you're in the process of memorizing it, to write it down. And يعلق here, the ta'liq here is referring to write down, right? To actually record and write down. So when the lesson will be completed and you read to the sheikh will give you some explanation, and then the person will take notes of the meanings of, or the understanding, or some benefits, or whatnot might be, and he'll also write down the lesson itself as a means of trying to retain, in helping to retain and remember and memorize the lesson. Okay? So after you've memorized it, to write down and to take notes and to repeat reading it and going over it a lot. فَإِنَّهُ نَافِعٌ جِدًّا, because writing the information and writing the lesson down is very beneficial. He says وَلَا يَكْتُبُ الْمُتَعَلِّمُ شَيْئًا لَا يَفْهَمُهُ. And the student should not write down something they don't understand. The student, when they're taking notes, right, they shouldn't write something they don't understand. Right? Why? Because if they write down something and they don't understand it at that particular moment, and they don't actually put a sign or something to actually inquire or find out about it, later on when they go back to their notes, they'll be like, what is this? What did I write? I don't even remember this. If there's something that you're writing down, if you happen to be writing something that you don't understand, then put a mark, a question mark, or something to at least remind you that I need to get the explanation for this, I don't understand this. Or don't write something down unless you understand it. Okay, so he's saying, write something, do not write something that you don't understand. فَإِنَّهُ يُورِثُ الْكَلَالَةَ وَالطَّبْعَ. Right? فَإِنَّهُ نعم. He says, فَإِنَّهُ يُورِثُ الْكَلَالَةَ وَالطَّبْعَ. Because what that will do later on, it impacts your learning and your understanding. Right? And your intelligence, you doubt yourself. Why am I writing something I don't understand? What is this? Right? So rather you should write something that you know, right? So he says from the outcomes of it is, يعني, it impacts your intelligence, right? وَيُذْهِبُ الْفِطْنَةِ, it impacts or it gets rid of, sorry, your intelligence, right? It makes you feel يعني, foolish. What is this? What am I writing? وَيُضِيعُ أَوْقَاتَهُ, and it's also a waste of time. Right? Just writing for the sake of writing and you're not understanding what you're writing. Rather, let your note-taking, you're writing down something that you understand so that it could be of benefit to you later on. Because if you go back to your notes and you didn't understand nothing, then all the effort you put in is what? Is wasted. You don't understand what it means. You have to go back and inquire, what did I actually write? I'm not even speaking about from the angle of just it being legible. I'm talking about actually the information that you're writing. Do you understand what you wrote? Right? So if you don't know, that's when you go after the class or during the class, if there's time for questions, then ask the Sheikh, what does this mean? I don't understand, and then he can explain it for you. Then once you understand it, it's good. You have something in there that you understand. وينبغي أن يجتهد في الفهم عن الأستاذ بالتأمل والتفكر وكثرة التكرار فإنه إذا قل السبق وكثر التكرار والتأمل يدرك ويفهم. He says, it is also important that the student puts effort in understanding the lesson from the teacher. So you've read to the teacher and the teacher is explaining it. You have to put effort in trying to actually understand the explanation of the teacher that's explaining it to you, to reflect and to ponder and to think about and to later on repeat it over and over again. Okay? فإنه إذا قل السبق وكثر التكرار. He says if the lesson is a small amount and the repetition is a lot, and the reflections of the meaning is a lot, يُدْرَكُ وَيُفْهَمْ. You'll eventually understand it. You will reach, you get to a point where you will get a proper grasp and understanding of the material. Why? Because you've combined the memorizing it and the repeating it with understanding the material properly. طيب. قيل, it is said, حفظ حرفين خير من سماع وقرين وفهم حرفين خير من حفظ وقرين. He says that it is said that memorizing two letters memorizing two letters is better than listening to وقرين. Here al-wiqr refers to a large amount of, a load that you put on top of a camel or a donkey. What is that called? Whatever it is. The merchandise that you tie over the camel, whatever it might be, right? Is one of, that amount of, what's the word I'm looking for here? There's a better word I'm trying to remember. You can see a load, right? A load, whatever the material is, it could be books, it could be anything else, right? A load that you put on the top of an animal is called wiqr. So wiqrain is two loads. So he's pretty much saying that memorizing two letters is better than understand or listening to two loads, meaning you're listening to a lot of information, right? You go to a class or you go to a teacher is talking, and you're listening, and you're understanding what he's saying, but you're not retaining everything, right? Unless you're recording it and then later on taking notes. It's different. In our time, you can record now. In the old days, there was no recording devices, right? So if you're in a class and the sheikh or the teacher is just talking, explaining, and you're not grasping everything by writing it down, or then there's a lot of information, but later on, if you're asked to repeat it, you can probably give a very brief summary. If you understood everything, you probably not remember most of the information. But memorizing a small amount that the sheikh mentioned and you know it and you memorize it verbatim, that's more beneficial because you've grasped it. Does that make sense? So it says, حفظ حرفين, memorizing two letters is better than listening to وقرين, two large loads. Okay? وفهم حرفين, and understanding two words is better than memorizing two loads. Meaning you've memorized a lot but no understanding. Right? So it's better that you understand a small amount of a small lesson than you've memorized a lot with no understanding. Does that make sense? So here again we see the importance of, like I mentioned earlier at the beginning, when we're talking about learning and your lesson, memorizing and repeating, it includes both memorizing and understanding, right? So a small lesson that you have memorized and you understood, you've combined the best of both worlds. Because you've memorized the lesson and you understand it properly. There's nothing that is ambiguous. Everything is clear. وإذا تهاون في الفهم ولم يجتهد مرة أو مرتين يعتاد ذلك فلا يفهم الكلام اليسير فينبغي أن لا يتهاون في الفهم بل يجتهد ويدعو الله تعالى ويتضرع إليه فإنه يجيب من دعاه ولا يخيب من رجاه. The Shaykh, he says وإذا تهاون وإذا تهاون في الفهم. If the person becomes lackadaisical or easygoing with understanding, يعني they don't give too much effort in trying to understand. They're very passive about it. You guys know what I mean? The person is not putting effort in trying to understand. Rather, they're just passive. They're memorizing or they're listening without really putting effort in understanding. He says, وَلَمْ يَجْتَهِدْ مَرَّةً أَوْ مَرَّتَيْنِ. And they don't put the effort in once or twice to try to understand the material. He says, يَعْتَادُ ذَلِكَ. The person will become used to that laziness and that easy, يعني not putting in the effort. And that will result in them not being able to understand even a small amount. Right? It goes back to what we mentioned earlier about the working out method example, right? You start off small amount of working out to grow, correct? To become stronger and stronger. What happens if you just stop working out and you don't put any work anymore? What happens to the muscle? The effort ends up, you relapsing backwards. Then later the muscle's weak. And then later on, you come back to the gym to work out the muscle, you have to what? Start over from the beginning, or you're not at the same level that you were at because you let go of practicing consistently. So he's saying even in trying to understand, you have to put the effort in. Because if you don't, right, and you're just somebody that does not care about trying to understand, you're just there to attend the class, you're listening to a few things, putting effort in retaining and remembering and understanding and pondering and reflecting, right? It's a habit that you have to get used to, right? Then you will be able to properly retain the knowledge. Or else the Shaykh says, فَلَا يَفْهَمُ كَلَامُ الْيَسِيرِ. Even something that is simple, يعني small, easy statements, the person will have a hard time understanding it or retaining it, right? So it's an issue of focus, really. Focus and practicing how to focus in trying to understand and contemplate and reflect. Right? فَيَنْبَغِي أَنْ لَا يَتَهَاوَنَ فِي الْفَهْمِ. So it's very important that the person does not be easygoing when it comes to trying to put effort in exerting يعني understanding and fahm. بل يجتهد. He has to put in the hard work. He has to work hard. وَيَدْعُ اللَّهِ. So you put in the work and you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking Allah for what? Help. So you put in the work and he says you make dua to Allah. وَيَتَضَرَّعُ إِلَيْهِ. And you humble yourself in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking His help humbly. فَإِنَّهُ يُجِيبُ مَنْ. Because Allah responds to the one who makes dua to Him. Allah responds to the person who calls out to them. وَلَا يُخَيِّبُ مَنْ رَجَاهُ. طيب. And Allah does not disappoint the one who puts their hope in Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. The one who has hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will not let you down. He'll respond to your dua. So you have to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and put in the effort. That's with understanding, that's with memorizing. Sometimes you might come across a lesson and you're just stuck. You're reading it again and again and again, but you don't get it. It's not clicking. What does this mean? I don't understand. You repeat it over and over again. You make dua to Allah, you repeat over and over again. Eventually you'll get it, or you ask somebody of knowledge. Same as memorizing, right? So these are habits that you have to practice. Or even the habit of just sitting in the class and listening to the Shaykh and taking in the information without being distracted. That takes practice. It's nothing that is easy, right? But it takes time. Sometimes you might have seen, even here in the masjid, sometimes when we have, for example, like when we do like a dawrah, for example, right? It's not an unusual. It's not a usual type of lesson. It might be 2 hours, 3 hours, right? Our attention span has become what? TikTok, 45 seconds, 50 seconds, and then we're not there anymore. Let alone imagine sitting there for 50 minutes, an hour. How I might be sharp at the very, very beginning where I'm taking in what the Shaykh is saying. But then later on, I get tired, I'm not really there as much anymore, right? There's things that are happening that I don't have the capacity to retain the information as much. But with practice, right? All of a sudden you see yourself having the capacity to sit for a longer amount of time and listen and pay attention. Maybe at the beginning you can only sit for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and it's too much. Have you ever seen if you bring a friend who hasn't been to a class like this in a long time, you bring him for the first time, at the beginning it's rough. He sits there 5 minutes, 10 minutes, forget about paying attention, he has a hard time even sitting cross-legged. His back hurts, his legs hurt, he's got to go sit on the chair, he can't, because he's got to get used to it. But if he gets used to it and he normalizes it, next thing you know, he can sit cross-legged for 50 minutes, an hour. He can pay attention for 40 minutes, no problem. He can take notes. But that requires practice. It doesn't happen just like that. It requires getting used to that type of thing. So he's saying if you have to put in the effort, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. طيب. He then he brings a long list of lines of poetry, pretty much talking about this topic of what we just mentioned about your lesson, the amount, repeating it over and over again, small lesson, repeating it lots of times. He mentions it in those lines. He says, أنشدنا الشيخ الإمام الأجل قوام الدين حماد بن إبراهيم بن إسماعيل الصفار رحمه الله تعالى. That scholar, he said he dictated and he recited for us these lines of poetry. إملاء للقاضي. He dictated it from another Imam, Al-Qadi Al-Khalil Ahmed Al-Sijzi في ذلك. And he says, أخدم العلم خدمة المستفيد وأدم درسه بفعل حميد وإذا ما حفظت شيئا أعده ثم أكده غاية التأكيد ثم علقه كي تعود إليه وإلى درسه على التأبيد وإذا ما أمنت منه فواتا فانتدب بعده لشيء جديد مع تكرار ما تقدم منه اعتناء بشأن هذا المزيد ذاكر الناس بالعلوم لتحيا لا تكن من أولي النهى ببعيد إذا كتمت العلوم أنسيت حتى لا ترى غير جاهل وبليد ثم ألجمت في القيامة نارا وتهلبت في العذاب الشديد. نعم. In any case, in summary, we won't go through all the lines. In summary, the Shaykh is mentioning about giving importance and service to the knowledge that is of benefit by being consistent in the lesson and by memorizing. And if you didn't memorize it, repeat it again and repeat it over and over again, right? And also take notes and write down so that you can help retain the knowledge, so that lesson can be something that is preserved for you forever and ever, which is true, subhanAllah. The lessons that you memorize and the text that you memorize is what really remains with you. Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen alayhi rahmatullah, and he used to say that the knowledge that remained with me is what we memorized when we were young. Right? What we memorized when we were young. And the poem, the line of poetry, right? In the poem about the fara'id, Rahabiyya, right? The Imam, he says, when he's speaking about thuluthan, he says, وَثُلُثَانِ وَهُمَ التَّمَامُ فَاحْفَظْ فَكُلُّ حَافِظٍ إِمَامُ فَاحْفَظْ فَكُلُّ حَافِظٍ إِمَامُ. He says, memorize, because every person who is a memorizer is an imam. Why? Because the hifz and the memory, the memorization, the knowledge that you have put to memory is really the knowledge that you have with you. That's in your heart. طيب? And he concludes by mentioning the importance of not preserving knowledge and not hiding the knowledge, and for the knowledge to be spread, etc. طيب, we'll read a few more paragraphs and then we'll wrap up inshallah. He says, وَلَا بُدَّ, after the poetry, he says, وَلَا بُدَّ لِطَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ مِنَ الْمُذَاكَرَةِ وَالْمُنَاظَرَةِ وَالْمُطَارَحَةِ فينبغي أن يكون بالإنصاف والتأني والتأمل ويحترز عن الشغب والغضب فإن المناظرة والمذاكرة مشاورة والمشاورة إنما تكون لاستخراج الصواب وذلك إنما يحصل بالتأمل والتأني والإنصاف ولا يحصل بالغضب والشغب. Here he says something very important. He says that it is important for the student of knowledge to do, he says 3 things. Number 1, he says al-mudhakara, to review. Mudhakara is to review with your classmates. Right? So it's to review together. So you have classmates with you to study together and to review the lesson together. وَالْمُنَاظَرَةِ, and to discuss, debate with each other. And amongst the students, to discuss the lesson and to debate and to go back and forth with each other on that particular lesson. وَالْمُطَارَحَةِ, mutaraha here is referring to present. طيب? To present the lesson. These 3 things right here are from the tools that helps you retain the knowledge, the lesson, right? So it's one way that you study the lesson, you memorize it, you read it, you go to the teacher, he explains it for you, you repeat it over and over again. And it's another thing to bounce back and forth with your fellow classmates in discussing and reviewing and debating. Why? Why do you guys think that's important? Nah. Okay, it shows, yes, that's one thing. It shows that you understood the material. What else? Yes? Good, so you might have understood it in one way and they understood it in a different way, and you can discuss it and go back and forth, right? And maybe you're wrong, or maybe they're wrong, or maybe you're right, and at least you can, right? You can complete each other's understanding, correct? You had your hand up, Ahmed? You maybe missed something, Mumtaz. You maybe missed something and somebody else got it, or say they missed something and you got it, and you complete each other in that case. So these 3 things are important. مذاكرة, مناظرة, مطارحة. He says فينبغي, he says it's important أن يكون بالإنصاف, but it has to be one that is done with insaf, with justice, with balance. والتأني, and for you to be easygoing, right? Gentle. Okay? وَالتَّأَمُّلْ, and to ponder and reflect. When you're discussing, when you're debating with your classmates, that you're doing so with justice, with kindness, with gentleness. Okay? And he says, وَيَحْتَرِزُ عَنِ الشَّغَبِ وَالْغَضَبِ, and you avoid and you stay away from shagab. Shagab is to instigate, to cause, to rile the person up. Right? Right? So الشغب here is referring to تهييج الشر وإثارة الفتنة, or fitan, right? You're trying to cause fitna or try to instigate the person, right? This might happen among students when they're having discussions. Oh, you don't know, man, you didn't understand anything. Where were you at? Were you even there? What happened? Akhi, man, you're a jahil, brother. What you're saying is complete jahil. That's the opposite of what was actually understood. Now what are you doing? Right? You're being rude, right? You're insulting and you're demeaning the person. And that might cause the person to instigate them to be like, no, I understood it. And now it's a debate that includes or that consists of anger and animosity, which is something that should not be done. So he's saying, وَيَتَحَرَّزْ عَنِ الشَّغَبِ وَالْغَضَبِ, that you have to avoid instigating and also avoid anger. فَإِنَّ الْمُذَاكَرَةَ وَالْمُذَاكَرَةَ مُشَاوَرَةً. He says, reviewing and discussing with each other, it is shura. You're getting each other's, you are consulting each other. That's what it's supposed to be. Maybe I understood something that you didn't, you understood something that I didn't. So whatever you understood from the lesson, you are sharing with each other so that you can consult with one another and solidify the understanding even better. It might lead to more benefit. You benefited something from your classmate benefited something from you, something that both of you didn't understand, or you guys had a discussion and you couldn't come to an agreement, so you go to the sheikh and you ask him, Sheikh, this is how we understood it, is that correct, is that incorrect? Okay? But it's done with respect. وَالْمُشَاوَرَةُ, he says, so this is mushawara, it's consultation. وَالْمُشَاوَرَةُ إِنَّمَا تَكُونُ لِاسْتِخْرَاجِ الصَّوَابِ, and the objective of the consultation is to reach or to ascertain that which is correct. You're trying to reach the correct answer. Correct? وَذَلِكَ إِنَّمَا يَحْصُلُ بِالتَّأَمُّلِ وَالتَّأَنِّ وَالْإِنصَافِ, and that can only be achieved or reached By being easygoing, right? By pondering and reflecting and being just, right? وَلَا يَحْصُلُ بِالْغَضَبِ وَالشَّغَبِ. And it's not attained through anger and being angry at each other, nor is it attained through instigating and arguing with each other. Okay? So he says, فَإِنْ كَانَتْ, and this is very important, he says, فَإِنْ كَانَتْ نِيَّتُهُ إِلْزَامَ الْخَصْمِ وَقَهْرَهُ. He says, if the person's intention is to إلزام الخصم is that you are trying to force your opponent to your understanding, right? Or your objective in the debate or the discussion is to defeat and overcome your opponent, or in this case, your classmate. You think your opponent is correct, so your intention is to do what? Prove him wrong, overcome him, prove that you're wrong and I'm right. Or to corner him and to argue with him until he submits to your understanding, right? If that's the intention of the debate that you're having with your classmate, he says, فَلَا تَحِلُّ الْمُنَاظَرَةِ. Then this munadara, this debating is not something that is permissible. وَإِنَّمَا تَحِلُّ لِإِظْهَارِ الْحَقِّ. But it's permissible for the objective of clarifying the truth, right? نعم والتمويه والحيلة لا يجوز فيها. He says والتمويه. Tamwih is التلبيس, that you are trying to either not deceive the person, but you're trying to whether you're trying to trick the person, right, or you're trying to find some type of a scheme to trap him into a corner to prove his point wrong. Sometimes when somebody's debating with somebody, then they'll think of ideas to try to debunk the person's idea. So, right, they will throw ideas to logically debunk the person's ideas so that they can be cornered and the person will be like, okay, I guess you're right, I'm wrong. Get what I'm saying? So he's saying if that's the intention, then that's not permissible. He says, إِلَّا إِذَا كَانَ الْخَصْمُ مُتَعَنِّتًا. He says, with the only exception is that if the person that's arguing with you or your opponent who's arguing with you is muta'annit, right? Muta'annit here is referring to the person, all he wants to do is to trip you up and to corner you, right? He does not want to seek the haqq. The person is clearly on batil, they're on falsehood, and they have no intention of seeking the truth, right? Then in that situation, you can debate with him to establish the haqq, but obviously you have to know what you are talking about. So obviously that might not necessarily be in the case with between the students, unless a person's upon some kind of misguidance, and that's a different situation. But in generally, the Shaykh is trying to mention that when you're discussing and you're debating between each other as students in the particular matter, there's nothing wrong with it so long as it is something that is done within the parameters that are permissible, meaning that the objective is to reach the truth, right? You might disagree on something, even if it's something that you disagree on. You might disagree on a matter, but the purpose of the discussion is for you to reach the truth, right? My intention should not be to prove that I am prolific in debate and I can corner you and subdue you and submit you, right? So now we're thinking of it as we're opponents. It's a fighting match. It's a wrestling match. When can I tap you out? When can you give in to say, okay, you're wrong and I'm right. You win, I lose. Rather, the point is to reach, right? To reach that which is correct and that which is the most true. So in the context of between the students, it should be one that is done with adab and with manners. And even in general, when you're dealing with even amongst brothers, there might be a lot of masail. As students of knowledge, when you're studying, you'll see you come across masail that you disagree on. You have a dalil and this one has a dalil. My dalil on this mas'ala is this, the person's dalil is this. Why do you believe this is right? This is the proof, and you're having a discussion. That discussion should be one that is what? That should be cordial. It should be one based on insaf and being just, and not you getting upset because, right, you think that you're on the right and everything other than you is incorrect, but rather you should understand where the other person is coming from, where the dalil is, how you think your dalil is right, and using the tools that are there in the Sharia. But this is something that requires adab, it requires knowledge, it requires insight. طيب? When we do not have the tools and we have a lack of knowledge, then that's when you'll see more often than not, those kind of discussions will always become aggressive. Because you don't have the tools aslan to have the discussion to begin with. You're standing with, this is what I believe is right because of that. Right? And you're not interested in entertaining what's there and looking at what's the issue, where's the point of difference, where's how to take it apart, etc. طيب. He says, وكان محمد بن يحيى رحمه الله تعالى إذا توجه عليه الإشكال ولم يحضره الجواب يقول ما ألزمته لازم وأنا فيه ناظر وفوق كل ذي علم عليم. He says this Sheikh Muhammad ibn Yahya, he said that when somebody, when he would come across in a discussion, when he would come across something that he doesn't understand, right? It's an ishkal he doesn't understand, and he cannot answer that particular question of the person, he would say to the person, ما ألزمته لازم, what you have obliged on me, right? we will take it for what it is. وأنا فيه ناظر, and I will go and research and try to look into this, right? Because I don't have an answer for it. وفوق كل ذي علم عليم, and above those who have knowledge is the one who's the most knowledgeable. بمعنى, he's saying that if you're having a discussion with someone and you don't understand a particular thing, you say, hey, you know what? I don't know the answer to that particular thing. I'm going to have to go back and do my research and look into it. And Allah knows best. طيب. وفائدة, he says, وفائدة المطارحة والمناظرة. He says, from the benefits of presentation or discussions with your students. Presentation meaning you guys come together with the lesson. One person presents what he understood from the lesson. Here's the lesson. This is what he said. This is the benefits, so on and so forth. So you presenting it, you benefit because you're retaining the knowledge that you have learned, and you're presenting it to others. And the others that are sitting there also take something that understanding from you that they might have not had. Right? And one of the easiest ways to actually retain knowledge is to present it and teach it amongst each other. Right? So it's very important. It's a very beneficial style of retaining the information as you come together. And you might say, you might plan ahead of time, say, okay, the lesson is we have to memorize or learn, for example, these 5 ahadith. We memorize it, we understand it, we take the fawaid from it, and for review we'll come together, each one will take a hadith, right? And then we come, you've studied all 5, but each of you are going to come and present one of them. And then after one presents it, then you can have a discussion, a back and forth, this, that, I understood this, okay, let's go back to the Shaykh for this one, okay, next hadith. And you will see that through that, you will not only retain the information that you've learned from the Shaykh and from whatever book you're reading it from, but you're also benefiting from each other. Now, so here's the fa'idah of presentations and munadhara is, he says the benefit is aqwa min fa'idati mujarrad tikrar. He says the benefit in presenting or repeating, or discussions amongst your peers, he says it's stronger than the benefit you get from simply repeating it over and over again on your own. We mentioned earlier, you have to memorize by repeating over and over again and understanding, right? You're studying, like when you're studying, it's like it's literally in summary, individual study versus group study. Right? So there's benefit to the individual study, but there's also benefit to group studying, but the group studying is beneficial if it's done properly. If it's done properly. But if the group study is always going to come together and we're going to start chatting and talking about this and that, and then discussing matters that are not related to the topic, then that's not really beneficial. But if it's actually planned out properly, it's very beneficial. Right? So he says, it's more stronger than repeating it on your own. لِأَنَّ فِيهَا تِكْرَارًا وَزِيَادَةً. Because in the group study, there is the repetition that you would do on your own and studying on your own and more. What's that more? The discussions, the benefits that you might get from each other, so on and so forth. طيب وقيل مطارحة ساعة خير من تكرار شهر. He says, it is said that studying and presenting to each other for 1 hour is better than repeating by yourself for 1 month. Again, showing that the benefits and the fruits that you get out of studying and repeating with each other and presenting to one another might be more beneficial than simply reading on your own. ولكن إذا كان مع منصف سليم الطبيعة. But he says, if the group study or the presentations that is done or the discussions is done with those who are munsif, they're balanced, they're fair and just. Okay? Salim tabi'a, right? They have they're by nature, their character is one that is pure, that is salim. Salim means it is safe from any type of defective character. Right? There's no debating, there's no arguing, there's no getting angry with each other. But rather, everybody's there with a clean heart to benefit each other. To benefit each other. Okay? He says, وَإِيَّاكَ وَالْمُذَاكَرَةَ مَعَ مُتَعَنِّةٍ غَيْرِ مُسْتَقِيمِ الطَّبْعِ. He says, beware and be careful, he says, of studying or reviewing or debating or discussing with a person who's muta'annit. Right? غير مستقيم الضبع. Right? Beware of debating with a person or discussing with a person who they have bad character. Right? They are those who their character is not upright. Right? Because that will impact the effectiveness of the group study or the review with each other. Right? فإن الطبيعة متسرقة. He says why? Because character and behavior is mutasarriqa. Mutasarriqa here, what he's referring to is it impacts you. The person's character, and mutasarriqa literally means to take some or steal some and what he is referring to is the person's character will impact yours. You will be impacted by that and you'll start taking from that bad character and you'll be implementing it yourself. You'll see yourself being argumentative and getting angry and getting upset, right? It is contagious, if that's the right term to use. But here mutasarriqa is referring to taking from that person's character bit by bit until it impacts you, right? That aspect of influence, knowing who you're around, right? وَالْأَخْلَاقُ مُتَعَدِّيَةٌ. And he says manners is muta'addiya, it spreads, it impacts others. Good character spreads, impacts and affects others. It's contagious in a positive way. While bad character spreads and is contagious and it impacts you in a negative way. We can apply that in a group of students that are studying together. You can apply that amongst a group of friends that are at work or at school. Those people that are around you impact how you act. This is a fact. Right? Don't let anybody, like I said many times, human beings, we are influencers and we are influenced. So you will have impact over somebody else just as much as they will have an impact on you. The only difference is some of us are what? Some of us are more, we influence others more than we're influenced, or we are more influenced than we influence. But people around you will have an impact on you, right? So somebody says, oh, I pray 5 times a day and I'm at the masjid all the time, and my best friend, the person who is the closest to me, who I confide in, is somebody that does not come to the masjid, that gets high and gets drunk and parties hard, and there's a gap there. That kalam doesn't make any sense. Because something's got to give. Right? That's just the reality of how people are. Human nature. Birds of feather flock together, as they say in English. That's what it is at the end of the day. And you have that statement in many other languages too. Right? In Arabic they say, الطيور على أشكالها تقع. In Somali they say, shimbir kasta, shimbir kisul dola. Every bird flies with its bird. Birds of feather flock together. That's how it is. So you are going to naturally be around people that are going to be on the same wavelength as you. It's possible that you know somebody that's just off the hinges, right? It could be a relative, it could be a classmate, it could be your neighbor. You might know somebody. You might have some type of relationship, whatever it might be for whatever the relationship is. But to say that this is the person that's my buddy, that I confide in, that this is my khalil, there's something wrong in the equation there. It doesn't make sense. Because naturally, those two people can't last together for a long time, can they? They won't be able to. It's impossible. Right? طيب. So the point of me mentioning all that is the people that are in your circle of influence, or in this case, your circle of class you're studying with, are going to have an impact on you. Okay? وَالْمُجَاوَرَةِ, he says, وَالْمُجَاوَرَةِ مُؤَثِّرَةِ. And close partnership, or mujawara literally means you're being a neighbor with somebody, being close to somebody. Mu'athira, it has impact. That's what I mentioned. The influence is going to be there when you're close to a person. That's just a reality. That could apply to classmates. That applies to husband and wife. That applies to co-workers at work. Wherever it might be, people have an impact on you as much as you have an impact on people. طيب. وفي الشعر الذي ذكره الخليل خليل بن أحمد رحمه الله تعالى فوائد كثيرة. وقد قيل العلم شرطه لمن خدمه أن يجعل الناس كلهم خدمه. طيب. Okay, he says that there's this line of poetry here has some benefits from amongst, and he says the line of poetry, which means, he says, العلم من شرطه لمن من شرطه لمن خدمه. Right? That ilm and knowledge, يعني from its condition for the one who serves it, أن يجعل الناس كلهم خدمة, that it makes all of those people that are connected to it ones that serve the knowledge. Right? In other words, if you're connected to the knowledge, then you'll be one that's going to be impacted by it. You're going to be studying, you're going to be learning it, you're going to be implementing it, وهكذا. طيب, you become servants to that particular ilm. Okay, so we're going to stop here. The Shaykh continues in the next portion. We're still in the same chapter where he says وَيَنْبَغِي لِطَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ أَنْ يَكُونَ مُتَأَمِّلًا فِي جَمِيعِ الْأَوْقَاتِ. So he's going to be talking about the importance of preservation of your time, being as a student of knowledge, the importance of time management and being on top of time and not wasting it. We'll speak about that inshallah ta'ala in the next class. We'll stop here for tonight. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Before I go, just as a suggestion, this Friday we don't have any program. We haven't announced any programs yet for Friday Night Lights. So for that reason, would you guys be okay to have the class on Friday? Friday night after Isha? Works for you guys? Sisters, it works for you sisters? Friday night? I see just one person. Just put your hand up if you guys is okay with Friday. Okay, Jamil. طيب. خلاص, we'll do it on Friday inshallah ta'ala. I would have done it tomorrow, but I have to do something else tomorrow. But we'll do it Friday. And then next week, we won't do it on Monday. But next week I'm thinking to do also Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Is that okay with you guys? Jamil? So this week we'll do tonight, and then we'll be back on Friday night. And then next week we'll do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And my intention, and I ask Allah to make it easy for us, is for me to finish the book by that Friday inshallah ta'ala. طيب. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.